Hey everybody, Josh from Populi here. Today we're going to talk about the setup required to manage leads in the system. So we like to make sure that we're helping admissions users understand some basics about how managing leads works so that you know what you're shooting for. Setup involves a lot of components, so it can be tempting to just start assembling everything, but we find that it's good to think through what you want to end up with. On top of that, you may already have a number of leads in progress, a whole jumble of, different kind of sources and things that you're bringing into the system as you're getting started there. So if you know what managing leads looks like in Populi and what you need to have in place, you'll be able to think through ways of organizing and categorizing those leads in Populi. Then you'll be able to track leads in Populi and keep them on track to completing the admissions process. So then once you have them sorted out there, you can connect with them via email, phone, text, whatever, and keep them moving through that process. So let's talk about goals. First of all, the primary goal of what we're going to cover today is the setup tasks necessary to start managing leads. The secondary goal is to look at and explore optional and helpful admissions features to inform your setup decisions about this. As with other videos, we're going to have a handout that'll be available along with this. So you'll be able to get a hold of that probably on either the knowledge base or just down in the description of this video. Let's talk about the roles that you need to do various aspects of things in this workflow. So for a lot of the setup, you'll need admissions admin. That gives you the ability to actually go in and look at the inquiry, which is under admissions and settings. So you can only get there with the admissions admin role. Admissions role, just for access to admissions leads or admissions inquiries, those are the kind of main other places, or the admissions tab on someone's profile would be another thing that gives you access to that you might need here. The staff role, that comes with either the admissions admin or admissions role, so you'll probably have that already, but just in case there's any confusion about what you would need for communication plans, that would be the staff role there. Okay, so let's give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover here. First of all, we'll go over what we mean by managing leads, get that sorted out. We'll talk about what's required. We'll do a demonstration of kind of the basics there and cover a few things alongside of that. Then we're going to real quick hit what's probably required or optional. That's something that we usually go over. We give you the what's absolutely required, but then we also cover some things that you might want to look at as you're deciding how to do this. Then we'll do a little recap, and then that'll be the end. What do we mean by managing leads? A lead is a person in Populi who's somewhere in the admissions process. That's the first big thing. So a lead is just a person in Populi who has a lead aspect. They have an admissions tab. So if you go to somebody's profile and you see the admissions tab there for them, if you were to add lead info there, then they would be a lead in Populi. So that's just how that works there. And related to the admissions process, of course, there are statuses and different things that defines where they're at in that process as far as Populi is concerned, but we'll get to that. Leads are eternal, kind of. The idea is that when you are creating leads, of course, you want to be able to manage them as you're trying to communicate with them. But then there's also important data that just helps you analyze your admissions process that's related to those leads. So leads don't get deleted or kind of thrown away. There's a specific way of managing those leads once you're no longer actively engaging with them anymore. Managing refers to getting leads into the system, categorizing and dividing them, keeping them moving through the process, and then communicating. And that's communicating with them and about them. Of course, you want to talk to leads, remind them that they have an application or some other component of something you need to keep them moving, or you want to let the rest of the admissions team know what's going on with this specific lead here, make notes about them, that sort of thing. So that's another item here. We're going to get to sort of aspects of all of those things there. As we're talking about this, what I found is the best way to think about what you have in Populi here is really oriented around looking at the funnel report. The funnel report, sometimes people miss it, but if we look at that funnel report, we'll be able to get an idea of sort of the way that everything is supposed to work together in Populi. As with other aspects of Populi, this allows us to cut with the grain of the software here. That means, as we've talked about on other videos, that it's idealized. So we're not saying this is exactly how your admissions process works or anything like that. It's just that this is how the software is set up. So if we can figure out what this report means, it'll give us a good insight to what's going on with the rest of the software and kind of what you're headed towards here. First, this report makes the most sense when we're looking at a particular time frame. So you can see that we're looking at a specific time frame. The time frame that we default to here is the 4 trailing months. So if you go to the report in June, it's going to show you a range starting in March and ending in June. So that's just what it defaults to. But of course, you can change this filter to whatever time range you're looking at. The most obvious application for that time range is that you're going to compare one range against another to see that, like, let's say you input you sort of put a new way of handling leads into effect for this upcoming term, and you want to see the difference between this upcoming term's leads that you've been managing and everything, and then last term's. Well, this time range would help you define the parameters so you can make that judgment. Right here, we're just looking at kind of an arbitrary time range because this gave us data to look at here. So, there's nothing about that sort of 6-month view that's of any fundamental importance. These over here are the statuses that describe the various thresholds. We're going to talk about those a little further as we get into things, but the idea here is that you progress along this line from status to status all the way through to the end, obviously from prospect down to enrolled. Of course, people don't necessarily go through each of those stages. They might start at, inquiry or application started, as well as prospect, but that's the basic idea, is you're moving through these statuses to the end when you're enrolled. One second, I'm going to take it. The total column just shows us how many leads were in this stage at any point during this time period. So just looking at that prospect status at the top, you can see that we had a total of 2 prospects in that status there. The entered column shows us how many leads came into the funnel at this point. The entered column shows us how many leads came into the funnel right at this point. So that means we had two leads that started as prospects, okay, which conforms to the total there. And so that's how many leads came in at that point, obviously. The continued column shows how many leads moved forward out of this status. So we've got a total of 2. They entered there, and then they continued out of that there. So that's what we're seeing there. We're seeing the goal would be to have as many leads continue out of there as you possibly can. So if you have 2 leads come in and 2 leads continue out, that's good. That's 100%. The loss status shows us how many leads did not move forward out of this status. So again, all of the prospect status leads moved forward within this time frame. But if we look down at applications started there, you can see that we had 8 total leads there, 3 continued, and then 5 did not continue. So the lost column shows us those 5 leads that did not continue out of the application started status. Just to clarify what I mean there, all of the stuff that we're looking at here is dependent upon that date range that we've set. So the leads have continued during this date range, or they have not continued during this date range. And that's what we mean by lost. Lost can sound a little scary or foreboding. It means that during the date range that we're looking at here, these leads did not continue to another status. That's all. Thanks. Again, this is about kind of analyzing how the admissions process is going. So if you find a place where you have a lot of leads being lost in the process, not progressing through, then you're identifying kind of a weakness. So that lost column helps you out that way. Again, the reason that we're talking about this is to get the idea of what you're managing your leads towards. And you're basically trying to move as many leads as possible through this process, losing as few as you can. That funnel report provides some helpful context as we think about managing leads in Populi. From there, we're going to jump into what's required. This one's a little funny because as far as what's strictly required here as opposed to some other parts of Populi, it's just 2 things. You need to have leads and you need to set statuses. But as with many things in Populi, it seems nice and simple, but there are 3 different ways to have leads that we're kind of categorizing them here. And then on top of that, once you have the leads in and the status is set, we've got a lot of additional options that you might want to consider as well. So let's first of all talk about what we mean about 3 different ways to have leads. And instead of demonstrating all 3 methods here in this video, we're really going to focus on one, which is the one that will apply even if you're going to start out with one of the other 2, okay? So we've got data migration. That process is its own process. So you'd be working with your implementation manager or whoever to get information in. If you have a database of leads that are coming in that way, that's how that information would come in. So we don't really need to deal with that. We will have another video for that importing leads yourself aspect of things here, and that'll be linked in a card up top and then in the description below for this video. The setup and embed forms, that actually happens at 2 different points. You could have an inquiry form and an application form. Most orgs that use admissions would have both. So we could go either way. We could talk about both of them. What we're going to do in this video is just talk about the inquiry form because that gives us sort of the longest runway. And really, once you understand a number of things about embedding the inquiry form and how that works, the application form is fairly easy to understand. But we'll definitely have more information on that in subsequent videos. Okay, so right now what we're going to do is briefly demonstrate these 2 aspects, setting up and embedding that inquiry form, and then setting lead statuses. To get to the inquiry form, you'll go to admissions, and then into settings, and then into inquiries. The first field on the form is that embed code there. The text in that box that starts with that angle bracket and then iframe makes up the embed code, and then everything following that. So what you would generally do is you would go in there and you would copy that so that you've got it, and then you would hand that code off to whoever handles your website. So if you're your webmaster or whoever, that's got to get over there and onto your website somehow. They then drop that code into your site, and then when students hit the page with that embedded form, they'll be able to fill it out and then submit it. So we're looking at a very bare bones example here. Obviously, there's no styling or anything. This is not what your website really looks like, but you could drop this form onto your Contact Us page on any website. And just that's not real Harvard. We don't work with Harvard. That's a joke. The inquiry form that we're using here is the simplest possible inquiry form that you can create. So you can see those limited number of fields there. But if we go back into Populi to the inquiry form settings there, then you can see that we could check those boxes for address fields and then show course of study inputs and then save. And then that would end up giving us those new fields there. So obviously what you're doing is collecting more data about leads, which means when you go to communicate with them, you now know more about them, where they're from, you know their course of study that they've selected. They're interested in the undergraduate bachelor's English degree or whatever it is. And then you've also potentially know which term they're interested in. So they might be ahead of the game or they might be cutting it close, but you would be able to group them based on these things. The downside of having more little fields to fill out is that, as some institutions find from the potential student's point of view, that's an unacceptably arduous chore, filling in those little boxes there. Let's say that at this point, the prospect submits the inquiry. That inquiry then will show up under admissions inquiries right there. So you can see there, we've got a whole list of leads happening, and then the one at the top there is the one that we're saying just came in. That lead submits their inquiry, or that person submits their inquiry, it comes into the system here. You'll notice that there's a little question mark by his name. Some of the others don't have. That question mark means that this inquiry hasn't been attached to a person in Populi at this point. So if you click on his name, then you'll be able to, you can see that there's a possible match there already, which means that apparently there's a person in the system named Waldo Thoreau. This may or may not be the same person. That's up to you to decide, but it's a possible match, and we'll call that out and suggest it there. You could also just add him as a new person, so then this inquiry will be attached to this new person that you create, or you could search more deeply for Waldo Thoreau and Populi and then add this inquiry to that person. What we're going to do in this situation is just choose that possible match and sync up this inquiry with that profile that's already in the system there. But then when we go to the leads table, now that we've done that, we've made that connection there, we can see under admissions leads summary that Waldo's lead has joined the other leads there. So actually, once we took that inquiry and attached it to that person, we turned Waldo Thoreau from somebody who was just an inquiry dissociated from any person and Populi into a person who is now a lead. And you can see that he automatically received that inquiry status. Okay, so one other thing to touch on here real quick is a relationship between inquiries and leads. Remember that lead is basically just a person in Populi who's at some point in the admissions process, whereas an inquiry is a status that a lead can have and also a form that somebody fills out. So that's the relationship there. That status is usually based on that lead having submitted an inquiry and that inquiry being attached to that actual profile there. That would be typically how those are managed, although as you're getting started, you might have people as inquiries even though they haven't filled that out in Populi. So that's how we set up and embed the inquiry form, which is that important first step, as we're describing it here, that you use to get leads into the system. As we move on to setting lead statuses, remember that these leads could end up in the system via any of the methods that we've mentioned, migrating data in, manual import, or those embedded forms bringing leads in. Going back to admissions, leads, summary, you can see that status column right there. We have a couple of ways of managing those different statuses in that column. First, if we click on one of those names, we'll be taken directly to that person's profile, to their admissions tab, and then to their lead info. Because they're on the leads table, they already have a lead populated here under lead info. Then you can set that lead status. So if you click on the word status there, you'll get a drop down with all of the lead statuses that you can set. One thing to keep in mind is that most of these statuses are updated automatically. However, if you're just starting out, like we're kind of talking about here, you may need to go through and manage those lead statuses manually to match them up where they were in your old system or whatever it was. Couple of little things to point out here. Remember that leads are eternal. And because of that, we want those leads to continue to exist so that the funnel report still has data to draw on there. So you might be wondering how we can keep these eternally accruing leads from overwhelming your list of leads, right? So if every year you keep pulling in more and more leads, then that list of leads is just growing and growing and growing, which means how do you deal with that? Well, the way that we deal with that in Populi is by setting leads to active or inactive. That way you can really easily remove inactive leads from the results that you're looking at, but the data from those leads is still accessible. So you can see over on the right there, we've got that active column. That's what we're talking about. That can be managed directly on a lead. So if you click on Madeline there, and then we'll be taken to her admissions lead info tab. We can click on active and then set that to no and then save. And once we've done that, then if we go back to our leads table there, we'll see that she's no longer active. Then we can go up to the filter and we can choose an additional condition on the filter there. So we can set that filter to active is yes. And then once we've applied that filter, then we'll be able to see that we've refined our list even further. Madeline no longer shows up. She's not an active lead. The point there is that adding that tag allows you to keep this clean. So you won't have all of those leads currently in play. You'll be just dealing with the active leads and filtering out the inactive leads. There's more to exactly all the details about how that active status works, but that'll have to wait for another time. And remember that what we're trying to do is get to a point where we can divide leads up like this so that we can contact relevant leads with targeted information for them. So using filters like this on that table gives us an example of how to do that. Let's say that we want to send an email to all of those applicants. They all have their application started, but they haven't finished it. So we want to nudge them to finish their applications. So then over on the right, you'll click on actions, you'll select email leads, and then you'll get an email interface, and then you can send a mass email out to everyone on the list. Sometimes there's some concern about, who's able to see what on those email lists there. You're sending out essentially individual emails to everyone on the list there. So you can email everyone all at once, and people aren't able to see who else this email is being sent to on this table. So you'll have options also for communicating with your team or the administration about leads. And the most direct way of managing that is on the leads activity feed. So if we click on someone at the top of the list there again and go to their profile, we'll land on admissions lead info. So then we'll click over into the activity feed. Then you'll enter your note about that lead. And then once you've got that note in there, you can click on show visibility options and you'll set the roles to whatever makes sense. Here, I'm assuming that we would want folks with the admissions and the admissions admin roles to see this note. And then we're going to click Add Note under there. Then that note gets added to the leads activity feed. And so anyone who comes here who has one of those roles, admissions or admissions admin, will be able to see that note there. So that's a good way of keeping the status of that lead kind of and what's happened with them and the work that's being done there visible to everyone who needs to know it. Real quick, I also want to circle back and call out a few details about lead statuses as well. Let's just go through each of these statuses here. The prospect status is the most basic starting point. That's someone who hasn't submitted an inquiry but has one way or another been entered into the system as a prospect. After that, inquiry, application started, and application completed are all automatic. They're triggered off of someone submitting an inquiry or starting an application or finally clicking submit on their application. So those get updated automatically there. When this leads application is set to accepted by your staff, the status here will be updated by that. So there's a whole other process that's happening over on the application that we're not covering here right now, but that's affecting what's happened here directly on the lead. Confirmed there, that's a manual status. If you have some kind of process by which you're having students get back to you and confirm that they're planning to attend your school, you're able to set leads to that status. And then typically, there are a couple ways of handling when the enrolled status is set on a lead, but we have automatic ways of handling that so that when leads enroll actually in a course, once they've received their user access and have logged in and enrolled in a course, or you've enrolled them in a course, and then that enrolled status can be turned on at that point, which will update that lead there. So most of those statuses are updated automatically. But if you're just starting out, you may need to manage lead statuses manually to match them up to where you were in your old system. We're going to real briefly get into several additional things. There's lots more we could go into. Hopefully we'll have other videos that will go in depth on some other aspects of this process. We're going to hit a couple things real briefly here. And also we're going to link to more information about these things in the description here to some of our knowledge base articles that cover helpful details here. First, you'd probably want to have an application form, at least one, set up pretty early on. That way you can, kind of like we saw with the inquiry form, embed the application on your site and then start receiving leads that way. Second, you'd probably want to create communication plans. These are set up under communications, communication plans. The idea here is that you can create a schedule for when templated emails and letters can go out to leads. And then you can even set up to-dos that get automatically assigned to specific staff members. Those to-dos are reminders like call lead about starting an application or whatever the next step in the process might be. Lead sources enable you to track the efficacy of a particular admissions campaign, or just to determine where certain leads came from. So you can set an inquiry up with a specific lead source and then route all of the inquiries to use that source. So let's say that you send out email A, you set up an email A lead source, and then link to that inquiry in the email. Then everybody that clicks on that link goes to that inquiry and that lead source there. So you'll be able to see all of the inquiries that result from that email. Or if you do some recording at a specific college fair, you can have a specialized lead source for that college fair. And then as folks use that lead source, you'll be able to easily identify all the inquiries that come from that one fair. There are many ways that you can use custom fields in admissions. Obviously, our basic lead statuses that you saw there are pretty rigid. Prospect, inquiry, application started, application completed, etc. So you may want to supplement some of the information there to know exactly where a lead is in your process. And to do that, many orgs use custom fields to add additional detail to those basic statuses. So you can have more information about the lead than just is contained on the status. And then when you're looking in the leads table under summary there, you can combine those various filters to look at the built-in statuses and then your custom statuses and get a clear picture of what it is you want to see there. Okay, let's real quick recap here. We went through what we mean by managing leads. You essentially having leads in place, being able to make sure that they're categorized the way that they ought to be. Then you have various ways of communicating with them and about them and keeping them moving through their process there. We talked about what's required. Essentially, the only thing that's really required is to have leads and then to go in and set their statuses and various aspects of their profiles so that when you're looking at them, you know exactly that you're looking at the group of leads you want to be able to communicate with or whatever it is. We demonstrated that process, how you can set up an inquiry and then put that inquiry on your website so that you can start receiving leads that way. We also talked about active versus inactive leads, all that kind of stuff. We just talked about what's probably required or some other options. And remember, you should be able to find good information on that in our knowledge base. And we'll link some articles in the description of this video so that you can get to that. That's it. Thanks for watching. Josh from Populi signing off. Don't forget to hit subscribe and go to that little notifications bell so that you can receive notifications every time we post a new video. Ding, ding, ding. Have a great day. Thanks for using Populi.